Croeso i'r hustings, mynediad ar amgylchedd BMC Cymru. Good evening to you all, and a warm welcome to BMC Cymru's Access and Environment Hustings. So, Neil Hockley dwi, a fi sy'n cadeirio'r sesiwn yma. So, my name's Neil Hockley. I'm going to be chairing this session this evening. I'm the voluntary chair of BMC Cymru. And in the day job, I am a senior lecturer in environmental policy and economics at Bangor University. So, quick introduction to BMC Cymru, because I know we've got a few visitors here this evening. We're a representative body that represents climbers, hill walkers and mountaineers in Wales, with over 7,000 members across the nation. We know we've got various non-members here tonight, which is fantastic. Obviously, we hope you'll all join BMC Cymru after this evening's session. So I'm really pleased to see such a good turnout tonight. I know everybody's absolutely fed up to the gills with Zoom calls by now, so thank you very much for turning out. Ymddiheriwn nad oes gyda ni gyfieithiad ar y pryd heno. Ond da ni'n croesawu pawb fan hyn ac croesawu cwestiynau yn Saesneg, ond ymddiheriwn am hynny, da ni'n rhedeg hynny am dipyn o shoestring hyn y bryd. So I want to start by just briefly explaining how the evening will work. In a few moments, I'll hand over to our three panelists to introduce themselves. Then I'm going to ask a few questions that have been suggested by the BMC Cymru staff and committee, and then we're going to open the floor to questions from the audience. So if you'd like to ask a question, we encourage you to write your question in the chat. So even if you've sent a question in advance, please do write your question in the chat, and our sort of backstage team will be going through the questions and picking out a good variety of questions that cover a range of issues to put to the panelists. I would ask you to ensure that it's good if your question could be posed to all three panelists in turn, and to keep your questions brief. Then at the end, we'll have a chance for the three panelists to give a sort of closing statements of about 2 minutes of any final remarks that they would like to make. So obviously, we'd ask that everyone, panel members and the audience alike, keep their questions focused on policy, not personality, and we hope for a very polite and robust debate this evening. After all of us here are, regardless of political differences, we're all members of the family of climbers and hill walkers and outdoor lovers. Of course, BMC Cymru remains strictly neutral throughout the election period. The only person I will be vigorously championing tonight is old Father Time. So I will be keeping the panelists to time in their answers. And I would ask everybody, panelists and members, to cleave to the spirit of Thomas Jefferson, who said the most valuable of all talents is never using two words when one will do. So on that note, and without any further ado, I will hand over to our candidates to introduce themselves in 2 minutes or less, without hesitation, repetition, or deviation. So we'll start with Jonathan Clarke of Plaid Cymru.
Good evening. I'm Jonathan Clarke. I'm the Plaid Cymru candidate for Newport West constituency, and I'm on the South East regional list. When you reach a certain point in your life where you've done more things previously than you are currently doing. I'm an ex-journalist who worked in PR for the Met Police, an ex-university IT professional, and currently work in recruitment. Politics aside, I'm interested in archaeology, history, Newport County, the Gwent Dragons, and hill and dog walking. I personally think the biggest threat to open access to green spaces and the mountains is the 2026 deadline for the registration of rights of way. The impact of that could be very, very significant. That should concern all of us, particularly as lockdown has taught us the hard way that access to the outdoors is good for our health, and not everybody has equal access to the outdoors. I've been very lucky in my life. I've been off the beaten track. when you could. I've walked in the Russian Caucasus, Northwest Frontier Province, and various stands. Highlights of my high altitude trekking has included gazing at the snow-capped peaks of the Pamirs whilst in the desert and escaping from the clutches of the Tajik KGB.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Okay, so our next panelist is Mia Rees of the Welsh Conservatives.
Hi, thanks, Neil. Yes, my name is Mia Rees, and I'm standing for the Welsh Conservatives in Cynon Valley. I was born in Plymouth, so I spent most of my childhood up on Dartmoor, to be completely honest with you, and that's where I found my love of the outdoors. I used to do quite a lot of climbing and abseiling when I was a little bit younger and a lot fitter and had much shorter nails, but not so much now. I'm a Cardiff councillor, and I'm actually running a local campaign to save a green space in my ward, which is known locally as the Northern Meadows. And that's something I care really passionately about as a councillor who represents a urban area, that our green spaces in urban centres are incredibly important, as well as, you know, our incredible national parks that we have across Wales and further afield. I love being in the outdoors, whether that's walking my dog, which is a greyhound, which everyone says, sorry, you take a greyhound up Cadair Idris? And I'm like, yeah, he's up for it, so why not? With my husband, who also really loves walking. He found his love of walking in the Scouts, and that's something that sort of he's carried into our marriage, which maybe I wouldn't have been so keen for if he hadn't tempted me. And we're also really keen mountain bikers as well. So we're not always doing it on foot. Sometimes we're doing it on wheels, sometimes with a little bit of electric to help us out. I'm also one of those people that always holidays either in a forest or at the foot of a mountain. It's sort of a running joke in our family, where in Europe or the UK is Mia going to be in a forest with no signal for 2 weeks each year. I used to work for the Prince's Trust before my current job, and through that job I saw firsthand the impact of exposure to the outdoors and challenges in the outdoors can have to people who didn't have access to those kind of challenges, and I saw it as an incredibly positive experience, and it's something that's really carried with me through my current job in education policy. So we've been asked to sort of tease you with maybe 1 or 2 policies in this introduction. So I wanted to mention the Welsh Conservatives' £2 million seaside and market towns fund, which includes a boost to local transport, because I believe that access to the outdoors is incredibly important. I'm going to finish there because Neil's
thank
looking
you very
at me
much,
like I'm
Mia.
running out of time.
Perfect. All right. Thank you very much, Hugh. Over to you, Hugh. Sorry. Thank you, Mia.
Thank you, Neil. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Diolch yn fawr iawn am y gwahoddiad yma hefyd. Thank you so much for the invitation. Great to be with you. Lovely to have a Hustings focusing on the outdoor and access to the outdoors. Myself, some of my background, I'm not only the Welsh Labour candidate for Ogmore, beautiful Ogmore, I have to say, which is the Bulk Mountain, by the way, as well. It's not just the Brecons in South Wales. We have some brilliant walk in our own local areas, which I hope we'll turn to later on. But I'm also the cooperative candidate, so Welsh Labour and cooperative candidate. I've spent a lifetime, having grown up, first of all, on the Gower, the first area of outstanding natural beauty in the whole of the UK, as you well know. That's where my love of the outdoors comes from. But since then, me and my family have traipsed everywhere. 2 years ago, before we went into lockdown, we did the anti-clockwise route on the Mont Blanc Tour de Mont Blanc, which was absolutely superb. But to be honest, our favourite walks tend to be locally as well, up on the hills around us here. I'm looking out here across the Sachbant Valley, just behind my house on the edge of my stag. And that's one of the things that we have to do with the outdoors, is sell the fact that it's right on our doorstep. You don't have to get in your car, travel miles, it's on your doorstep. In my background, I've been the Minister for the Environment under Hilary Benn in the UK government, worked with the BMC, the Open Spaces Society, the Ramblers and others, in order to put in place the England Coastal Path. But also, of course, we created a new national park in the South Downs as well. So I won't go on and on. I'm Vice President of Ramblers Cymru, but I am a keen outdoors person, not so good with an ice pick anymore, but certainly I like the high hills as well as the rambling coastal path as well. Diolch yn fawr.
Excellent. Thank you, Hugh. We won't hold your membership of the Ramblers against you tonight. Okay, thanks very much to all of the candidates, and we started in perfect form in terms of timekeeping. So you've all mentioned actually sort of access to green spaces and etc. You know, in your introduction. So my first question as chair really is that, you know, we've had in some ways a revolution in access about 20 years ago now with the Crow Act, but still only 1/5 of Wales is accessible by foot. So how will electing you and your party to government ensure the expansion of these important access rights that we would like to see enlarged in Wales? And we'll put that question first of all to Mia, if I may.
Obviously, access rights are incredibly important, and it's also encouraging people to access areas that maybe they're less familiar with. I get very fed up whenever I see all the cars outside Pen y Fan. I'm like, there's so many other places you guys could be going, which are much better. And I think that it's encouraging people to use those and really publicising what we have. One of our plans is to make Visit Wales a more independent body, less linked to Welsh Government. And we hope that through that and through more ownership of stakeholders through Visit Wales, we'll be able to sort of publish the routes that do exist and really make sure that they are promoted to people. There are obviously huge questions with regards to right to way. We are a different country to Scotland. We don't have that long history that Scotland and places like Norway, for example, have. We are more populated, but I think that there is much more that we can do in that space in order to encourage more people to use it. So we're certainly open to ideas, and with our Seaside and Market Towns Fund and our community fund, which is linked to that, one of the ways that that could be accessed is through community groups to publicise and promote more routes near to them, which would hopefully boost local tourism as well, which of course is good for rural economies. Thank you, Neil.
Great, thank you very much. And now to Hugh.
Thank you, Neil. A number of ways and very practical ways. First of all, we need to take in the next government, and it's a commitment there in Welsh Labour, the massive consultation that we did on the natural resources and access to natural resources, how we increase the amount of access we have, not only in terms of the countryside and the coast and the hills, beyond right to roam, beyond the Crow Act, beyond the coastal pathway, and looking at things like margins, but also wider access generally, but also in the ripine environment, so the river environment. Now, these are difficult issues, but we've done the consultation. There's some difficult issues to wrestle with, but we've said that we will take that forward. We will also empower and rejig slightly the access forums, the National Access Forum, but also the Local Access Forum, and the partners on it, including people who want more access, but also including those who own the land, the ones who have concerns about greater access as well. We'll also, as part of that, need to put in place into Wales, as part of those proposals, issues to deal with statutory duties of responsibility for you and me and others who access the countryside and our mountains and moors as well, so that the onus, a bit like Scotland, falls on the individual to act responsibly if you're given greater access. We've seen it during the pandemic. It's lovely to see people connecting much more with their outdoors locally and around the countryside, but there's been a lack of education, a lack of understanding, a lack of contact with those local areas that makes them behave responsibly. So we need that in place as well. Number of other things I could say. National forest, that national woodland of Wales will enable woodland walk from north to south when we have completed this, and this will require working with landowners as well. We will also create, by the way, and the proposal is in there in the manifesto, just like we did when I was the UK Minister, a new national park in northeast Wales, in the Deeside there, in the Cloydian Hills. Excellent. And lots more I could say, but I've used up my 2 minutes.
You have indeed, you have indeed. Thank you very much. And now over to Jonathan on that same question.
Rather than repeat what's already been said, I agree that we need an all-Wales approach to it. I agree that we actually need to take access to the outdoors into schools and introduce children to outdoors, the mountains, the sea, the coast, and the lot from as earliest age possible, as practically as possible, because it is an education thing. You hit the nail right on the head. The problems we had in lockdown is a lot of it is driven down. People were driven back on themselves, and they'd never been out in the countryside. They'd never been local, and you saw lots of fly tipping. You saw lots of waste being dumped, particularly in the area where I live. There was a lot of it. Now we have to do better. We do need to revisit the consultation with natural resources, which took place. That's fine. We need to move beyond that. We also need to get the mountaineers, BMC, really involved. I've been abroad. I've been to Asturias. I've seen the way the national parks are run in parts of Spain. There's much, much more meaningful local input, not just from local residents, but also from the people who use the facilities. In Asturias, the national park around Picos de Europa is partially run by the mountaineers, by the people who actually use it, and they are actually involved in footpath creation. There's a lot which is done to reopen areas, to put new footpaths in at higher levels and at lower levels. The other issue we need to look at, which is one the Welsh government has effectively kicked down the road for a long time, is the issue of canoeists and river users. That is an issue which the Welsh government has done its best to ignore. That is something that we have to look at, because that is potentially a real problem, particularly with the criminalisation of trespass, which is one of the things that look to be brought in. The other real impact is going to be the 2026 deadline for footpath registration, because that is coming very quickly, and that is going to have a massive impact.
All right.
To open space.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Okay, that was quite a general question there. I want to move into a more specific issue now. So we know that following on from Brexit, we've got a real opportunity here in Wales to sort of reconceptualise the way we do things like agricultural support, etc. And there's a lot of talk about things like public goods. Yet in the draft Agricultural Wales Bill so far, it's a bit unclear as to how the government should deal with landowners who, while receiving public funds, perhaps, are failing to comply with their basic requirements, such as maintaining stiles and gates or not obstructing rights of way and access land. So how should this be addressed by the incoming government of whatever political colour it may be? And I'll put this to Hugh, first of all.
Well, the first thing to say, Neil, is we've made very clear that in the post-Brexit and post-Common Agricultural Policy landscape, we will keep the funds flowing into not only our land use and our farming and food production, but it will be on the basis that it will be to do with the additionality of the goods, public goods delivered. So that will be for biodiversity, for ecosystems, for flood management, and for access as well. But I have to say, Neil, in response to your point, where landowners are currently not maintaining it where they should, that should actually be enforced right now. Now, I have to say there are really good landowners, okay? There are really good ones who work with BMC, with Ramblers, with others to make sure that we've got a good access. If you look at last year, the fact that we've actually opened the Cambrian Way, which is phenomenal, and a lot of people are going to be walking that, that's been done with landowners doing it. But where we use public money going forward has got to be to do with the additional benefits that accrue to you and I and the Welsh citizens in their entirety, and that will include access. So let's not start by saying, should it be just used to repair what's currently available? Let's start by saying, well, that should be done. That should be de facto done. What else can we do in terms of increasing access beyond that? And I'd be interested to know, to be honest, whether this is something supported by the other parties, because we just had the accusation that Labour has kicked river access down the road. No, we haven't. We've made crystal clear in the manifesto and arising from the consultation that river access is a polarised debate, but we intend to move it forward. I'm not sure we've had that crystal clear guarantee from the colleague who spoke before me.
Okay, thank you very much, Hugh. And Jonathan will have his chance to come back on that in a moment, but I will go to Mia first of all, and then to Jonathan on my question.
Thank you, Neil. I would also just like to address Jonathan's misinterpretation of the changes to trespass. It is not a criminalisation of trespass. It has been made very clear that it is specific circumstances relating to intent to reside, and it is not to do, it should not affect ramblers or those walking at all. So just wanted to correct that. The UK government's Agricultural Act does include the power in order to provide better financial assistance to improve public access, and also the direct where that needs to be through local community groups. And I think that there is also the suggestion to look at new agro-environment schemes, which I know that's something that the Welsh Government have also talked about, to be given their credit, which is look at repairing existing paths and looking at where new paths could be brought about, and that would be part of the funding as well. So those are options that are all being looked at. I appreciate some people feel that that's not soon enough, and I understand those views completely, but I do feel that both governments are moving in the right direction on this.
Okay, thank you very much. I suspect we'll come back to the trespass issue and whether intent to reside will criminalise wild camping, etc. But that's probably for another question. Over to you, Jonathan, on my original question. Thank you.
Funding for agriculture, a lot of which was European Union driven, is something that's going to be a potential nightmare for the next 20 years. We haven't really seen a clear indication of how the funding is going to come, how it's going to be delivered to people working in farming and agriculture. There are implications for loss of income, loss of farms, if the funding package isn't correctly delivered. That's something which should have a significant impact on access to the environment and footpaths and everything else that goes with it. In relation to using public money, I've always been a great believer, if you're going to spend public money, you work it hard for every single benefit you can squeeze out of it, which does come back and benefit all of us, whether we're working in agriculture, whether we're accessing open spaces, or whether we're selling goods and services. If you're going to spend public money on whatever you're going to spend it on, including agricultural subsidies or funding, you need to work it exceptionally hard to maximize the benefit. And if it's done correctly, then that will benefit all of us.
Great. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So on to my final question as chair, a bit of a different one now. Sitting here in Eryri in Gwynedd, do you think that a strong outdoor recreation sector can strengthen the Welsh language in its heartland areas like Gwynedd? Or do you think it poses a threat to the Welsh language in those areas? Or maybe how can any such threat be mitigated? So over to Jonathan first to answer that question.
One of those questions that comes up periodically from time to time, and understandably so. I think part of the problem, if you're going to make our communities prosperous, and prosperity is what will, it's not a case of preserving the language, prosperity will enable the language to grow and strengthen, then it's actually giving people the opportunity to tap in to the industries that relate to accessing the national parks, whether it's walking groups, whether it's hospitality. It's actually enabling local people to make a living and their communities to benefit from the spend in the national park, because the national park is are big draws and do pull people in from the world over, admittedly not at the moment, but they do normally. I think we have to revisit the way national parks are looked at. We have to revisit the way local people are directly involved in how the national parks run. And I think what we have at the moment is not delivering the true potential for the local communities to make a good living in their own communities and also take benefits from the national park.
Okay, thank you very much. And next, Hugh.
Well, look, I think this is something of a personal perspective of mine, but when I go to places to walk, I go because of the difference in those areas. I go for the experience and the adrenaline and the buzz of being in sometimes unknown situations, sometimes slightly edgy situations, but I also go because I want to also immerse myself in the culture of those areas. Now, here's the challenge, I think, for the outdoor recreation sector in its entirety now, It's preserving the very best of Welsh culture and Welsh language, whilst also attracting in not only day visitors, schools, day recreationists and so on, but also those who come from further afield. Because quite frankly, I'm not sure that somebody coming down from the southeast of England to Eryri, to the Brecons, whatever, wants to see an identical version of what they could see in the Peak District or the Yorkshire Dales or elsewhere. They want to feel that it's very local and different and special to that area. So there's our challenge, and part of that is preserving the language. So I don't have any truck with those who say that the language is a waste of time, that the language is a problem. The language is an asset, and we need to make sure that we're also opening the opportunities for young people who want to get into the industry, into the sector, either on a solo basis or working for outdoor education facilities or whatever, in order that they can also come into it and use their language as a working thing. We've got a massive ambitions in Wales by 2050 to have 1 million people speaking Welsh naturally in their daily lives. The outdoor sector is going to be part of that, otherwise we won't achieve it.
Great, thank you very much. And now over to Mia.
The Welsh language is many, many things to many people, but it is a really important part of our Welsh culture. And when I go to any place in the world, I want to be part and embedded in that culture, and the Welsh language is part of that. And I think that it's really important the Welsh language is part of our outdoor activities centres. It's used, it's promoted, it's encouraged, you know, and visitors like to use it where they can, and I think promotion of that is a positive thing. I think we also need to recognise that some of the most deprived areas in Wales are rural areas where the Welsh language is the first language of many speakers, and therefore we need to bring prosperity and strengthen the economy in these areas, and that's really critical. And I don't see that being at odds with a strengthening, prospering people with speaking the Welsh language. So I think that it all comes together, but actually to keep those communities thriving, we need to strengthen the economy where those communities are, rather than pulling people out of those communities where their Welsh language is so important, down to cities and areas where they can't use it as much. So, you know, that's the balance that we've got to strike, and it's not an easy one to do, but I absolutely feel that the Welsh language can be part of that strengthening economy.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. We're now at the time where we're going to start moving over to questions from the audience. So I'm going to call upon Tarquin in a moment to ask his question. But I'd just like to thank the three panelists for exceptional timekeeping so far. So thank you very much for that. Okay, Tarquin, hopefully you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
I can unmute myself, and my question to the panelists is, was the closure of the access land by the Brecon Beacons National Park Authority a good or bad decision?
Okay, thank you very much, Tarquin. We'll put that to Jonathan first, and then Mia, then Hugh. Jonathan, you're muted, I think. We can't hear you.
Yeah, there we go. Technology, the joys of technology and the joys of Zoom. I think when the lands in and around Brecon Beacons were closed in the early days of the pandemic, it literally was driven by public concern and panic, understandably. We also closed a lot of parks in urban areas right at the start of lockdown, which wasn't exactly the brightest thing to do, but it's understandable considering the concerns at the time in relation to the infection rate. It took a long time to get the balance right. So I think it was driven by panic, to be honest, because we were in a completely unknown situation that we'd never faced before. I don't think it was necessarily the right decision to make, because socially distanced walk-in works. But saying that, we all saw the pictures over the first couple of weekends of lockdown with people swarming.
I think, just to interrupt and clarify for all three panelists, I think Tarquin is asking about the closure of the Brecon Beacons in January of this year, not in March, April of last year, just to clarify.
Right, okay. Fair enough. Yeah,
if you have anything to add on that.
I don't at this point.
Okay, no problem. Whoever I said was next, I do apologize.
I think you said it was me, Neil.
That's fine. Go for it, Mia.
I'm happy to go next. I think the problem was people travelling to rather than people accessing, and I think it's really sad that we stopped people travelling to. But I do understand why it happened. But at the same time, I feel that by January, we had a better idea as to how things were spread. Now, it goes back to the earlier point I made, is that everybody seems to flock to the same points every time. And actually, that's the problem as I see it, because if people had actually genuinely spread out over, we have so many walks in the South Wales valleys, we've got walks to the west, we've got walks to the beacons and beyond. If people actually knew all about all of those, rather than my example earlier of everybody going to Pen y Fan, it wouldn't have been the problem that we were concerned it would be. So it goes back to my earlier point about the need to promote those other walks. I think it was a real shame, but I'm not going to sit here and say that the Welsh Conservatives would have done it differently necessarily, because I understand the concerns that were there. However, as we move forward, as we come out, as more people have vaccinated, as we know better about being in the outdoors, we know it's good for our mental health and well-being, but we also know that it's very unlikely to spread in the outdoors, particularly in our wonderful outdoor areas. So I think with that going forward, we should avoid closure at all costs, and it should be an absolute last resort for people who are misusing the areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mia, and over to you, Hugh.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer from Mia, because I think the truth is it wasn't driven by panic, it was driven by necessity. And the necessity showed, based on the medical and scientific advice at that time, that there was a real risk in terms of that closeness, the honey spot syndrome of where people head to Pen y Fan and Condy and others, and they get too close. And also the rules at the time were not to travel great distances. That was the clear guidance. Now it's very different, I have to say, if you've got your boots on and your sticks out and you're walking from that lovely pub just above the top of Merthyr and you decide to go out onto those hills from there, than driving up from Cardiff in the height of a pandemic when we're seriously worried. So it's with great reluctance, but yes, and it wasn't only the Brecons, as you know, it was many honey spot areas where car parks were closed as well. Mia is right though, we're in a different situation now. One of the interesting things, by the way, and Mia's picked up on this a couple of times, this idea of helping to educate and inform people about other opportunities. My favourite walk in the Brecons is Ban here, across to Llyn y Fan Fawr, Llyn y Fan Fawr. It's a beautiful walk. You'll be lucky if you see 6 people, even on a busy day on that stretch. One of our proposals in our manifesto is actually to provide that digital platform as part of the work that we'd be doing on the access to the outdoors. So we would create that ability to go onto your computer, go onto your app, with input from BMC, Ramblers and Open Spaces and others, and know that there's a local route close to you, easy to do. I do it, you probably do it, people on this call probably do it, because we've all got our little gizmos. I use the OS one, but we should be making this easy for the public to go, I shouldn't have to get in my car and travel 50 miles. If I walk up on that hill outside me, I can have climb the same gradient, have the same experience, and see just as good views when I get to the bulk mountain over the other side of the hill in front of me.
All right, thank you very much. I think that was exactly 2 minutes there, Hugh, so bonus point for that. Okay, our next audience question is coming from Gwenda. Gwenda, if you're there, you can unmute yourself and put your question. And this will be going to Mia first, and then Hugh, then Jonathan. So, Gwenda.
Hello.
Hello.
Goodbye. Right. This is the one I posted because I sent in 2. So, Welsh Government began its consultation on improving access to the outdoors back in 2015. And as Hugh mentioned, we had thousands of people respond to that. We all know that current access laws don't work. They don't work for anyone. They don't work for landowners. We understand that the expert groups have now reported. There are recommendations. So what will you do to ensure that we can move forward these much needed reforms to enable increased and responsible access to our countryside for both walkers, cyclists, and those accessing the waters? This is not just about walking, it's about all activities. So
yep, Okay, thank you very much. Over to Mia first.
I think it's disappointing that quite a lot of various things that were started within this government term were not seen through. I think some of that is absolutely down to COVID, and some of it's just to do with sort of poor management of getting various things through. And I think it's a real shame that this hasn't sort of boosted, because I think when you engage people in a consultation like this, and you need to keep the momentum going and keep people on side with you and move forward with it. And I think that that's where we need to be, and that's where we need to be looking. And I think we need to sort of hit the ground running. And I think that there needs to be a particular team or dedicated civil servants, which I hope there is, but I'm not in Welsh Government, so I don't know, that is looking at this and taking this forward with gusto as to where we've been. There's no need, and as Welsh Conservatives, we wouldn't reopen the consultation and do it all again just because we're a different party. We would take what has been discussed and move forward with it, hopefully with speed. Obviously, there's always competing priorities with every single government, but if this is something that you genuinely care about, and it's something that you feel a future environment minister or whatever the title is needs to take forward, I think they can do so, and working with local communities, farmers and such like that have control access to that to move it forward as soon as possible. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. So it's over to you, Hugh.
Yeah, I'll keep this very, very brief, as I went to 2 minutes the last time. The reason we've had a delay is twofold. One is undoubtedly the response to the pandemic, but let's be frank, massive reams of civil servants were drafted to deal with the EU transition, and that's not an excuse, it's a hard reality. I saw it happen. I was in the Senedd watching as areas of legislation were shut down one after the other, policies shut down one after the other, because our brightest and best civil servants were put to work on the EU transition. This isn't, by the way, a pro or anti-Brexit argument, it's just a simple statement of fact. That means we've now got to a point where we should have put this in place, and we should have had the Environment Act by now as well, by the way. We just haven't been able to do it. So the next government needs to hit the ground running. We've done the massive consultation. It deals with it's a great question, because it is to do with wider access. It's to do with more access, not only on rights of way, but actually on things such as margins on coastal areas as well. And it does include bikes, and it does include horses and all non-motorized activities as appropriate within parts of the countryside. And we need to get on with that. So we've got that commitment from Labour to do it. I hope it'll be supported by the other parties when we bring it forward. And on top of that, by the way, it's also what we do with local rights of way. We need to actually make sure that the money goes into local authorities, so that to get to these wider tranches of land, we can walk from our door along well-maintained paths to get up into the hillsides, to get down to the coast.
Great. Thank you very much, Hugh. So over to Jonathan.
Well, we need to pick the next government, obviously picking up the pieces after COVID and also after Brexit, one of which is going to take slightly longer than the other. Need to pick up the consultation and act on it. It's as simple as that. It is literally that simple.
Okay. Anything else you want to add to that, or we'll go to the next question? No. Okay, so our next audience question comes from Lynn Robinson, who's our illustrious president of the BMC as a whole. So over to you, Lynn, with your question, and this will be going to Hugh, then Jonathan, then Mia.
Thank you. Yes, Lynn Robinson, president of the BMC. Good evening, Jonathan, Hugh and Mia, and just thank you very much for your time this evening, and a huge thanks also to the BMC volunteers and staff that have organised this. So my question is, the BMC already is the secretariat for an all-party parliamentary group for mountaineering at Westminster. So what would your #1 agenda item be on the proposed Senedd cross-party group for outdoor recreation as asked for in the BMC Cymru manifesto? Thank you.
Yeah, great. I will definitely support that. I'd be more than happy to be involved in the cross-party group in the Senedd. I know it's one of the asks in your manifesto, so there's my first offer. If you want my involvement, I'll be there for you. In addition to my chair in the active travel group and this, that and the other as well. More than happy to. Did you say first item on the agenda, Lynn?
I did, yes. What's your number one agenda item?
Number one, you've got a range of things in your manifesto, but I'm actually going to pull one out that isn't on there because it pulls together a lot of it. It's the one we've talked about a lot tonight. Number one on the agenda should be increasing access to the outdoors, and putting that as what do we as a CPG need to do to make that happen? Where do we need to influence ministers? Who do we need to speak to? What groups do we need to put in front of ministers? How do we work with the CERA committee and others in order to shape their agenda for the first 100 days of the Senedd, in order that we, if you like, whatever government is in, hold the ministers' toes to the fire to make this happen, this broad reach that comes out of the consultation that we've done, access to water, access to outdoors, both mountains and coast, and make that happen. That should be the number one issue.
Great, thank you very much. Jonathan.
I would agree with that pretty much almost entirely, to be brutally honest. It is that simple. We need to absolutely increase public access to the outdoors, and we need to make it as simple and easy as possible. And it's something government can do, working with local government, working with the mountain groups, and working with a whole host of other bodies. How you pull that off in the short term, I don't know, but it should certainly be a medium to long term. At the end of 5-year term, we should be in a wholly different place from where we are now.
Great, and can we count on you in the all-party group in the Senedd if you're elected?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, over to you, Mia.
I've had the pleasure of being involved in a number of cross-party groups over the years. I was the secretary of the cross-party group on the Armed Forces and Veterans, and I've just finished my term as secretary of the cross-party group on tourism. So I've seen firsthand what cross-party groups can achieve when they work together. They bring ministers in, they have a really collaborative relationship cross-party. I think they can be fantastic. My number one agenda item would be to improve public health and through participation in outdoor activities. And I think that's the part of your manifesto that really grabbed me and excited me, if I'm honest. I think one of the reasons why is because it involves cross-departmental working, which I find really interesting. It means you can pull on different budgets, and different ministers pushing for the same thing is always a good thing in my view. And it also will make us look at that access question, particularly in regards to young people accessing the outdoors. And then there's a link there to boosting local public transport and how we do that. I would just like to link that back to our Seaside and Market Towns Fund, because part of that is boosting local transport, and we want communities to say where those local transport routes need to be boosted and improved. And I think part of that needs to be encouraging visitors and people who are local to be able to access the outdoors and access good spots if maybe perhaps they don't have a car or they're not familiar with the area. Thank you very much, Neil.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. And our next question is coming from Eve Shrimpton.
Hello, hi there. It's been good to hear you talk of the importance of education when talking about the outdoors. You know, we know it's really important for outdoor spaces as well as for young people. But at the moment, outdoor education centres have been closed for 15 months. Many have closed their doors permanently, and the industry is frankly on its knees. There's questions over, you know, who will survive this crisis. So my question is, how would you support this industry this year and going forwards?
Great, thank you, Eve. And I'll put that question to Jonathan first, then Mia, and then Hugh, just so you know the order. So, Jonathan, over to you.
I mean, obviously, COVID has closed an awful lot of things down across the board. Where possible, government funding to get through the period has been allocated and pushed out. Obviously, there have been casualties along the way, and some businesses have not survived. There's been a flood of redundancies. We have to look at rebooting the educational sector. We have to look at rebooting the outdoor pursuit centre so we can actually get kids back into the countryside, so we can begin the whole process. It is going to be a difficult process, and it's going to involve government and local government and public bodies working together to try and help. But I think we have to do something, and it's one of the things we have to look at so we can hit the ground running as we do come out of COVID, because COVID is going to come to an end. And we have to be in a situation where outdoor pursuit centres and all that are in a position where they can pick up and run. So we can get kids back out in the countryside as fast as possible, because it's a vital educational part of the process. When I was a kid in school, going through to the few outdoor pursuit centres we went to, it was a fantastic experience. It's absolutely transforming to get me out of an urban area, to get me out into the countryside, right in the middle of nowhere, literally just the other side of Talibond. But it felt like it was on another planet. It is marvellous, and it is something we really have to encourage. It's going to be a difficult process, but it is something we need to do. It's something the Welsh Government needs to do, and it needs to be done now so we can pick up from day one when the restrictions go.
Thank you. Mia.
Thank you for your question, Eve. I'm really sorry with the number of outdoor activity centres that have needed to close their doors. I think it's a terrible, terrible shame. As someone who benefited from them hugely when I was young, and my husband still goes on about his trips to activity centres. And then when I worked at the Prince's Trust, seeing firsthand young people who had never really had the opportunity or the knowledge to access the outdoors, and the absolutely transformative effect that these outdoor activity centres had on them, it is an absolute loss. So as Welsh Conservatives, we are putting in place a community sport bounce back fund, and that is for all sports. I'm not going to pretend that's just targeted towards you guys, but the whole point there is if a sports association, including facilities, have basically had really struggled this last year and a bit, they would be able to access this fund, and there would be grants in place to help boost them and bring them back up. So I think that's one option. And also our tourism recovery fund. A lot of outdoor activity centres have diversified over the years, and they do things like, some of them do them for hens and stags and birthday parties and all sorts as well. And they would be able to access the tourism bounce back fund. So I think that's really important as well, that they sort of maximise and are able to get as much money as possible. I also just wanted to briefly say, I think the new Welsh curriculum offers a real opportunity here, and it should offer flexibility for schools to be able to access these centres more. I have my mum who's a teacher, she's a PE teacher, so she used to do a lot of trips, and over the years it's just petered off and off and off, and a lot of that's because of paperwork. I really hope that the new curriculum allows the flexibility, and that teachers really take up the opportunity to access these outdoor activities, because I think that actually now they can say this is on the curriculum, and that's why we can do it. Thanks, Neil. Great,
thank you. Perfect timing again. Over to Hugh.
3 points, and I'll deal with the difficult one first of all. They've got to be reopened as soon as possible, and as soon as safely possible. But let me not give you any, I'm not a minister, but let me not give you any false guarantees. It needs to be done at a point where the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer, and the Chief Scientific Officer, together with the advice, actually says we can now do this. And it's not a question of, as you know, day activities within the centres. It's the overnight stays is the issue at the moment, and particularly the overnight stays, which increase the ability then potentially of the unfortunately of the virus then to go either between individuals or between, as we often have within outdoor education settings. We might even have different groups or different schools. Now, I'm sure there's a way to manage this. And I would want any future government to be working with the sector to find the earliest possible opportunity to reopen and to do it safely. Now, we've got one of the 3-week reviews coming up shortly after the election. So whoever is in that hot seat, it's currently under review, by the way, with the Welsh Government now. They've made that clear in response to outdoor education sector. They are constantly reviewing this. So that's the first thing. The other two are funding. There is funding that's been put to the centre, but it's scratched the surface. Like a lot of sectors who've been affected, it's scratched the surface. So I think the government should keep that under review as to whether there's additional funding that will be needed for this particular sector to bounce back. And that isn't a promise or a pledge, okay? But that is a thing I would expect any government to keep under review as we try to get the sector up and running. And the third one is exactly what Mia was saying, the opportunities within the new curriculum. It's a flexible curriculum, and there is a focus in it within the outdoors. Now, on that basis, we really have to do some work with the schools of all age groups to make sure that they take advantage of the opportunities to get, like I had when I was a kid, to get us out into the great outdoors and learn socializing as well as what it's like to be up on the hills.
Thank you very much, Hugh. I'm working on my threatening face, going closer to the camera as you get to 2 minutes. Our next question is going to Steve. Is coming from Steve Quinton, and this will be going to Mia, then Hugh, then Jonathan. So Steve, over to you.
Thanks, Neil. So, yeah, my question is, what would your party do to improve the availability or accessibility for non-car transport? So how can people get to these places without having to get in a car and drive there and park somewhere and then potentially cause a problem because there's not enough parking? Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
It's a really fair question, Steve, and I think it goes back to that access point, doesn't it? And I think one of the things we need to do is improve public transport to these good spots to start these sort of things, and they can be incorporated into existing routes. They can become the end of routes. You can get a bus from Cardiff city centre that takes you all the way into the Brecon Beacons, and that's fantastic, but it takes 2.5 hours. So you can understand why people would rather get in their car and drive, unfortunately. So there is absolutely work that needs to be done. And then there's also an ability to be able to book bikes, for example, onto buses, because I have known people as a biker myself who have been refused access onto public transport because they've got bikes and they can't do it. Now, that does exist already in rail and has been restarted after it was paused during the pandemic. The bikers weren't able to book a space, and I think that needs to be extended out. Like I said, that boost to local transport that we're going to focus on, that needs to be for the local community and also ways of boosting the economy of the local community. So that's where these routes are really, really critical. And again, it goes back to promotion. I'm really excited about Hugh's idea of an app. I wonder if something like that could be incorporated into it, not just what are the routes, but the different routes to get to it. Sorry, Hugh, to sort of pass that on to you, but I'd be really interested to know if that's where you're thinking of heading. Thank you.
Great. Well, over to you.
Mia, we're in danger of agreeing on too many things here tonight now. I think there is potential in that sort of technological approach, without a doubt. But I do think as well we need to be bold. I think it's quite interesting during the pandemic that out of necessity, some, for example, of the national parks, Snowdon, for example, and others, have actually had to restrict parking. Now, if we're going to do that and say to people who have no other option but to drive because they have mobility issues and so on, but they want to see the peaks and so on, then we actually have to make available better public transport options. And we've done it before. We have done this before in Snowdonia, in the Brecons and so on, and then we walk away from it and we say to people, just bring your cars, just make the whole road a complete motorway. And it spoils the experience for everybody. So we do have to invest in it, and it has to be local and national partnerships. So it does touch on one of the pledges we have in our manifesto, which is to do with bus re-regulation. Same as we're doing with the metro in South Wales, the metro in North Wales, etc., bringing it back under democratic public ownership so we can choose where the routes go, what they do, what times they flow at. But then also working with not just the parks authorities, but local authorities and regional, there will be a regional structure within this that can say, Pembrokeshire National Park, Snowdonia National Park, etc., this is how we are going to increase the number of people using public transport to access. We know we can do it. If you look at the Mid Wales railway line at the moment, they have tickets which allow you to hop on and hop off at every single station, and you can do it all day long and walk to the next station. We need to be much more imaginative in the way that we make it easy and affordable for people to use public transport options.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much, Hugh. And over to Jonathan.
Wales-wide single ticketing would work. That would be a good step forward. I've seen the bus services in Snowdonia and Pembrokeshire work well. I've seen them work badly. If I want to push my brother-in-law over the edge, I suggest catching a bus from Llanberis to Pen y Pass, because that will just push him into apoplexy. Because when it works, it's great. When it doesn't work, it can be very, very frustrating. It's largely down to investment. We need to look at how we want to encourage people to get to the national parks. And when we get there, we need to, how do we encourage them to move around? if you're going to go for park and ride, then you need to make sure the bus services are regular. You do need to re-regulate. You're absolutely correct in that, Hugh. But we do need to look at it in an integrated nature. It is difficult to carry large chunks of kit round on small hopper buses. If you've got a bag full of all your climbing kit and your ice picks and your all the rest, it is going to be difficult. The idea of booking in advance is perfect. It's not possible at the moment. It's something that needs to be looked at. The idea of using technology to make it easy, so you can have a single point of contact app or something like that, that would be fine. That's fine. But we're going to need to do it. I've seen where it works and it's great. I've also seen doing it differently. When I've been in Spain and I've seen the way national parks are run there, it is done differently. They have a much more rugged country than we do, yet they can make it work. They can make it work in Asturias and the Picos de Europa, and we can make it work anywhere in Wales. It's just going to involve the willpower and the investment to make it work and getting people on board to use it.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan. I gather we've got one quick question to finish off, so we can, if we can keep our answers to half a minute each. So, Robert, over to you for your final question of the night.
Thanks for that, and thanks for really invigorating so far. What I'd like to know really kind of pressures have from the climate and biodiversity crisis worldwide be your actions with real actions for the Welsh landscape to deal with these climate and biodiversity pressures.
Okay, thanks, Robert. You're breaking up a bit there, but I think it's your number one action to deal with climate and biodiversity crises. So we'll just we'll go Hugh, then Jonathan, then Mia. I think you could just mention one thing that you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to get the Environment Act through, but we've also got to take through the proposals we've brought forward with Welsh Labour on sustainable food and farming. And that is to do with what we talked about earlier, which is maximising the biodiversity, environmental, ecosystem benefits of farming and landscape management. It does mean being explicit about paying farmers and landowners in order to do this, and we should be, because if you can invest in proper management of the Plynlimmon Hills and you save Tewkesbury from being flooded, then that's a darn good use of public money, quite frankly. Great. So that's what we would do, is take that through. That's one good one. That's great. That's your one thing. Who's next? I can't even remember who I said was next now. Yeah, go for it.
I would push for local procurement. We have to cut food miles, and the simplest way to do that is to go for local procurement. We produce fantastic agricultural produce in Wales. We need to make sure it gets to our local communities, into schools, into public sector, and is easily available to public sector. Cut food miles, cut carbon emissions, and we'll be on our way.
Great. Okay, and over to you, Mia. One thing.
Clean Air Act for Wales in the first 100 days of Welsh Conservative administration, and a £20 million Wales Wildlife Fund to support conservation efforts and improve biodiversity, with ambitious targets that a Welsh Conservative government could be held accountable to.
Okay, thank you. That was technically two things, but you were brief about them, so I'll let you off. Okay. That's all we've got time for in terms of questions from the audience. So a massive thank you to the audience for that. We'll go give the panelists a final chance to say any closing statements they would like to do. We're going to go with Hugh and then Mia and then Jonathan on that. So a maximum of 2 minutes. Take it away, Hugh. Yeah, and this won't be a party political broadcast, actually. This won't be a please vote for Hugh and vote for Welsh Labour. It's something we haven't touched on much. The reason that we're so concerned about this is not purely because we like walking, as though I do. It's because we know outside my house here, I live in an area where we're right next door to Caira. Caira is a beautiful area to walk. It's also one of the most disadvantaged communities in the whole of Wales. What we need to do is actually, with the problems of obesity, lifestyle challenges, etc., we need to make outdoor access, outdoor enjoyment, the poetry as well as the prose of the outdoors available to everyone, not just the people with the expensive kit, not with the people with the four-wheel drives that jet off to this, that and the other, but actually to those people in Caira and elsewhere, because that's where the advantages come. The power of the outdoors
is then actually transforming people's physical and mental well-being and transforming their lives. I learned that very early because I was lucky, like most of you here today. We need to give that opportunity. The next government needs to give that opportunity to everybody.
Excellent, thank you. Mia.
Thank you very much, Neil. So there's a number of different factors at play here, and I think we need to pull them all together and really maximise all the different threads that feed into this issue and really make sure they're delivering for those who want to access the outdoors and want to enjoy it in the most responsible and best way possible. I've spoken a lot about our Seaside and Market Towns Fund, and I think that is really important, that boost of the rural economy, exactly where it is, and particularly with that focus on local transport and connectivity. I've also mentioned the Wales Wildlife Fund. We're really important that we need to improve what we're doing with biodiversity in Wales. We don't want to lose more species and more go on the red list. Is not where we want to head. We want to plant 8 million more trees. That's 5,000 hectares across Wales, which is an ambitious target, but we really do believe that we can deliver it. We want to tackle littering and fly tipping in the countryside that we enjoy. It's one of the biggest blights when I personally go out for a walk, and we would ban single-use plastics. Not just us that said that, that is a cross sort of party thing, and I think we need to all work together on that and really make that littering at the other end of the spectrum a real challenge and how we're going to challenge that. And one of the ways we want to do that is through a deposit return scheme. Got a Clean Air Act for Wales, first 100 days, really get started on this, and hopefully that will be another policy that will get cross-party approval and we can really push through in meaningful ways. But I just want to finish on our proposals to increase spending on mental health and well-being and use of more social prescribing. And I will absolutely be championing time in the outdoors and supporting people to access the outdoors as a critical part of social prescribing if we're truly going to encourage as many people as possible in order to access our wonderful countryside. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan.
There's an awful lot of things to pull together because we need to enable people to feel they can go out and embrace the outdoors. 23% of the population of Newport West has no access to a private car. So they have no option but to use public transport, and public transport doesn't work because it's dysfunctional to a degree. That's something government can fix at local level. We also need to absolutely, the benefits of outdoor activity, the benefits of just being out in the green, for want of a better phrase, are massive. We've learned that during lockdown. We knew that before. We just need to make sure it's at the heart of everything government does in the next term. If we can do that, the health benefits, both mental and physical, will be massive and people's lives will genuinely be improved. And that is something government should do. It should be about enabling people to have better lives and better quality of life. If you're not doing that, then government might as well pack up and go home.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. Diolch yn fawr I bawb am ddod. Yn enwedig ein tri ymgeiswyr. Thank you so much to our three panelists. I know it's a hard job responding to questions, on the fly like that. So a big thank you to you. We wish you all the best for next week. And regardless of the results, BMC Cymru is going to be keen to work with all of you and all of your parties, I know, after next week's results come in. So, diolch yn fawr pawb. We will hopefully see you the other side of the election to really push the agenda of climbers, hill walkers, mountaineers, and everybody who loves the Welsh countryside and coast after May the 6th. So thank you to all, and thank you for impeccable timekeeping. I was the only one that broke the time limit, but I couldn't resist squeezing in an extra question.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you to all the team at BMC. Really appreciate you inviting us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hopefully see you on the other side.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant.